Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of Angie Speaks Interviews. Today, I am here with Peter Coffin. We're
Hello.
I love your extremely patriotic background. It's pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, I'm just like I'm all about America, guys.
I'm really excited to talk to Peter today, and thank you guys for coming. I've been away. I was on vacation out in New York City, which is why there's not been anything on the channel. So I figured that I would come and do an interview, but stay tuned because there's going to be a new video next week, hopefully. Yeah. Uh, yeah. So I guess I can start by kind of talking a little bit about my time in America.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're all very interested in America.
it was
What?
really surreal. I was talking to you a lot while I was there because we were finally in the same time zone, which was
Yeah.
rare for us. We're always missing each other because of the time differences. But yeah, we got to talk quite a bit while I was there, and it was really weird being in America. Like there was this dark vibe, just this general darkness that I got when I was there. I don't know if I'm noticing it more now because I'm older or if it's just always been there. But there's this weird, brutal kind of despair, especially in New York City. Yeah, I don't know. Explain, American. Explain it.
I think it's kind of just people are starting to realize that we can't go back to normal. I think as people have gotten older, yes, as I've gotten older, I've obviously looked around at the world more and said to myself, actually, no, it's not that great. Which completely explains this, but yeah, I think it's a combination of factors. Like we've had Trump for a while. I think people are kind of getting more and more fed up. I think there's also kind of a real aggregate in Joe Biden sort of showing up that like, oh, wait, before Trump actually wasn't that great. That's why we got Trump. Because Joe Biden is basically, yeah, more Obama, guys, right? And Obama wasn't this like fail safe that saved us from all of the problems that we, you know, just basically pointed at each other for years saying, maybe if you would just do better,
Yeah.
we could have a better country. I think people are realizing it's not just we can do better. It's that there's power above us. I think more, whether they explicitly realize that or it's kind of a more intuitive realization coming, I think it's starting to set in with a lot more people. And New York is full of folks that are very, sort of on the pulse of the media landscape, and
Yeah.
I think it's really starting to show up in a lot of our media, both fictional and
Mhm.
non-fictional.
Mhm.
So yeah,
I mean,
let's bring them all leftism.
yeah, I mean, it was very strange to me that my lib friends were not excited about Biden. I was expecting them to be, but they weren't. So I guess there's been sort of a shift there. But it still didn't take away from the weird sense of despair. I felt literally as soon as I got to the airport, there was just this weird oppressive atmosphere that I couldn't really explain or articulate. And obviously, in a city like New York, people there tend to be more left-leaning than other parts of America. There's still this weird sense of hopelessness, and also a weird sense of madness. Like everybody's slightly insane. I mean, it's similar here. I mean, that's not to say that England is utopic. It definitely isn't. But we have the whole kind of keep calm and carry on ethos. So it's kind of a low level kind of despair where it's just just have a cup of tea, everything's gonna be fine type of thing. But America's just kind of welcome to the jungle, bitch. Like we're gonna fuck you up. It's really,
We're literally just all Axl Rose.
yeah,
And
basically.
now that he's come out of his shell, we realize what America is, and we're like, oh shit.
Yeah, literally. It was very strange. I did eat a lot of really good food and a lot of really shit food as well. I feel like there's no
We're
in
known for
between.
both.
Yeah. Yeah, my friend that I was staying with, she lives in Queens, but in it's like a Hispanic kind of Asian part of Queens that she lives in.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of really cheap Chinese food around. So I was eating a lot of that, and like, oh my god, you guys have like no food regulations. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, I'm pretty sure I was eating some like grade F meat at one point. Um, so I did get quite ill at one point during the trip, which really sucked. But there's also a lot of really good food too, which confused me because it's like there's no like middle ground or whatever.
Yeah. There's no decent food.
No decent food. I went to I didn't actually visit Manhattan. I only went to Manhattan one day, and that was to get rice pudding. There's this place called Rice to Riches. If you're ever in New York City, make sure you go there. They have like 50 different flavors of rice pudding, and it's so good. It's so good.
Well, next time I'm in the area, I'll check that out.
Yeah,
or I will try to. I don't know. Whenever I'm in New York, I'm always ending up like there for a reason. Being somebody who I either have to go there for some kind of work or something like that, and I haven't been there in a while. So next time.
Have you done any touristy stuff there before?
No, I've actually never done anything touristy there.
Is there anything touristy that you would like to do?
Well, we're going back to Scotland next month. We'll probably see you because we'll be in the same country, and it would make sense to.
Yeah.
But we're actually going to Scotland because Ashley hasn't been back there in quite a while. So
yeah, it'd be
awesome. We'll probably walk around and do lots of tourist stuff there because I don't really know anything. I've been there once, and I basically did tourist stuff with Ashley, and probably will do the same thing.
Oh my god, I can't wait to like fucking see you guys. It's gonna be so cool. And I love going up to Scotland. Scotland's really, really cool. I want you guys to come down to London too, but it might be easier for me to just come up to you. I don't know, like whichever way, we'll make it work. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, one way or the other.
One way or the other, it's fine. But there's a lot of really cool tourist shit to do in London as well. But it doesn't matter. Glasgow. Are you going to be in Glasgow or are you going to be in
Aberdeen?
Aberdeen.
We're gonna be up in Aberdeen.
Aberdeen, cool. I've never been to Aberdeen before, so that's definitely awesome. But yeah,
Granite City.
Yeah. It's been a really kind of busy couple of like months for me with traveling. Like I was in Belgium with Amelia. I went to Amsterdam before that. I'm in New York, so I really have to like settle in, hunker down, and get shit done. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about DLI, which is the thing that's on everybody's lips. Everybody kind of wants to know what the fuck's going on. So would you like to talk a little bit about DLI?
For people who aren't aware, I think a quick explanation would be in order. DLI is a real sort of you and I are working to basically try to identify new leftist content creators. Currently, it's in an attempt to sort of address the why is LeftTube so white question. We've tried to talk mainly to, or actually exclusively to, leftists of color to try to find new people to start making leftist videos for YouTube. Since you've been traveling, that's basically, we've been talking about doing a stream to raise some money to put cameras and microphones in people's hands. And currently, we are in the process of sort of contacting people, overcoming all of the social anxiety to contact people to do the streams. So that's basically where we are with that. When we get to that point, first off, we're going to, currently we have, with the amount of creators we have identified and we're kind of going back and forth with about things that they'd like to do, giving some script input, stuff like that. The people that we have about, where we think about a $5,000 goal to put cameras and mics in all of these folks' hands. We think that'll probably do it. But if we end up raising more money than that, we're going to have to probably identify a charity to donate the rest of it to. But yeah, I think that's going to be a lot of fun. The stream is going to end up being, I think, a lot of sort of party game playing, a lot of I see a leftist of color in the chat. Email one of us or get a hold of us somehow talking about if you're interested in making leftist content. But we're going to be doing some party games, some karaoke, just generally a fun time with the leftists.
Yeah, basically. Basically. It's going to be like a little kind of like party kind of vibe type of thing. But yeah, right now we're in the process of organizing all of the inertia. So I urge y'all to be very patient with us because wrangling leftists together has never been easy.
No,
Better
it's not
men,
easy.
it's not easy. Better men, NBs, and women before us have tried and have had an even worse time than we have at it. So we're trying our best to get everyone together and to sort things out. So that's where things are at the moment. But we'll be updating people in the server and on Twitter as things progress. So that's done. I'm glad that's out of the way because now we can get to the actual interview. Every time I have you on or you have me on, it's either because of fucking drama or because we're trying to promote something. So this time, yeah. So this time, like we actually get to just chill and talk to each other, which is something I've been wanting to do for a really long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, totally.
It's, I mean, we're very often working together and very not often doing like fun stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I figured since like I'm trying to do something right now in terms of like making a new video, it would be fun to just kind of do this. And I think everybody else appreciates that as well. So yeah.
I hope so.
I hope so too. So let's jump right into the interview questions. So first of all, I would love to talk to you about your book, Custom Reality and You, or Cray, as the cool kids call it.
I mean, that wasn't even an intentional acronym, and I think that is just like when I realized it was going to be that, I was like, perfect. I named it exactly the right way.
I don't believe that. Your dad's sense of humor, like, how could that have been an accident?
Okay, well, I identified that it was the acronym. Actually, I think about halfway through writing it. So it wasn't on purpose. It was just, I did realize it before it came out, and I kind of just let it sit to see how long people would take to be like, this is cray.
Well, it's pretty perfect. It's pretty perfect. I read the book once before we were friends, and then after you sent me the remastered copy of it, so that was the second time.
The one with way less typos and errors in it.
That one. And I was absolutely blown away. For those of you who don't know what Custom Reality and You is, it's Peter Coffin's book. It's largely about capitalism, and like it's almost like a Debordian analysis of like the modern image. I don't know if that's like a great way of putting it. Would you like to do a better job of footnoting your own book?
I'd say that's probably a pretty good way of putting it. I think I mean, Society of Spectacle is a really dense book, and it's really difficult to understand. And some of the more key takeaways from it are actually kind of simple to explain. Like the idea of an image being just the sort of fetishization of a thing that is presented to people. I mean, yeah. Custom Reality and You is kind of like a simplified version of several aspects of leftist theory, sort of woven together. They're things that I've worked on for a long time, talking about how discourse works like a market, talking about how these sort of images are being commodified, and we're sort of doing the alienated labor of producing these commodities. It gets people really mad at me sometimes because like everybody, there's some people that have very specific ideas as to what a commodity is, and it's more or less not that. It's kind of making it a much more abstract thing, because capitalism has become such a diffuse and confusing beast, so to speak. And it's just an attempt to make sense of some elements of that. It also goes through a lot of aspects of more basic like aspects of Marx's theory, couple of other folks. Yeah, I think it's kind of basic stuff, but it's also brought together in a way where it's not exclusively just reviewing old things. It's attempting to make connections with how things are now in a way that I wish more people would do.
Yeah,
and not necessarily that people aren't doing it. It's just I tried to make it accessible to somebody who hasn't read any theory before.
Definitely. One of the things I was going to say was I I think part of the reason why certain people get mad about it is because people get very touchy about building upon old theory of like revered theorists, or the idea that you would so dare to strike out on your own and try and sort of analyze things using those models, but also in a way sort of trying to create your own. You know, there's like a lot of academic kind of gatekeeping, a lot of academic gatekeeping on the left specifically. And I understand why, you know, that people don't want people to be revisionist or take things out of context or confuse people. But I don't necessarily think that that's what you were doing in this case. I don't think that that's what your intentions are. I think you're quite careful about things like that. But at the same time, I think that there is that sentiment that who are you to build upon the works of so and so, or who are you to try and cultivate your own form of analysis of capitalism and its maneuvers. So I really admire the fact that you were sort of brave with it and just didn't give a shit and just continue to do it. It's a good thing for the plebs. It's
a pleb book, because I'm not an academic. I don't know how to write a book. Like I said, the first edition was riddled with typos. It was I have attention deficit hyperactive disorder. I spend a lot of time you know, not exactly being correct at, like, I when I'm making a video, for instance, I am not sure exactly what I'm saying. Like, on an abstract level, I usually am, but how to connect it to how to speak to a person is not, it's much harder for me sometimes. So this was kind of an exercise in how do we take something that is abstract and, for the most part, I think rooted in very like accepted analysis. Like most of my stuff you can trace back to Marx. I don't really try to deviate too far from him, other than sort of understanding that an image is as much an object as a physical object in today's capitalism. At least that's my opinion. There's going to be people that obviously argue with that. But for the most part, I think that it's important not just to do it for myself, but for people to understand that, like, there's nothing really stopping you. You should understand that what you have to say is valuable, what you have to say is important, and it's not any more or less important than any academic or media person just because they are accepted into some merit hierarchy. In my opinion, like, I made this book partially to be like, hey, we should be doing this. Like, make books. The Amazon is a shitty company. Like, there's no questions there. But the fact that they made it so anybody can make a book is something that we should take advantage of, rather than be like, oh, books, they're for academics. No, they're for anybody who can read. And that's not necessarily everybody on the planet, because education systems aren't necessarily great. But I mean, it's something we could be taking advantage of, and any normal person with a computer and can make a book now. They even have a program on Amazon.com called Kindle Create. You can make the entire paperback in that. You don't have to know anything about formatting it or anything, and that wasn't around when I wrote this book even. So I would really encourage people. It's also a great way to sort of cement things for yourself. Like, I combined a lot of my own disparate ideas into one, I think, more streamlined critique that actually works as a book. And if I hadn't have done that, I don't know if, like, I'm operating on all of that stuff now as base assumptions, and it's so much easier for me to go back to it after having done that. I would really recommend that if you have the time to try, like, even if you don't finish it or actually publish a book, it's not the worst thing to try to do. I don't know what I'm doing, and I did it. So
definitely, I agree. I definitely agree. But there is this sort of like weird kind of cuntish academic. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't.
Yes, that's kind of it. Yes, it's a bit cuntish.
Sorry, I'm like, I shouldn't use that sort of language, but yeah, it's
at Cunt University.
Cunt University. Yeah, there's this like weird kind of academic cuntish, like kind of dick measury, gatekeepy type of attitude that I see when it comes to things like trying to build on theory or trying to kind of create your own. It's sort of this idea of not only do I dislike what you've come up with, but I also dislike you as a person. And I think you are a problem. And I think you need to be like, you know, gotten rid of in some form or another, which I think is really, yeah.
It sounds familiar to me for some reason.
Yeah, I've seen it happen to you a lot, and it's also happened to me. I've seen it happen to.
Oh, I know. As soon as you release social justice could be a clout game, people
yeah.
are like, nope, no, absolutely not.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was like a mishmash of all kinds of different forms of theory as well as my own opinion. You know, and the fact that I even mentioned the term social capital was seen as an affront because there are a lot of people that don't think that that's a real thing.
Well, and it's obviously one of many forms of capital. I mean, if you accept Bordeaux's forms of capital, which Theory Plebe is in the chat. His friend actually did a very good breakdown of forms of capital that I would recommend to anybody because it breaks it down into plain language. Anyways, if you don't accept those types of things, then obviously, yeah, sure. I could understand why people don't like the type of thing that I'm talking about. But the thing is, we don't exist in a society that is just like normal, I guess is the way to put it. Like everything we do is transactionalized, all of our social interaction. Like to talk about like a currency and capital as if these can't be abstract things that we are supposed to sort of take on the norms and mechanics of in our social lives. I think it's not to rule that out is unintelligent. And I think that a lot of people have done that. And like, if you go back to even say Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism, he talks about a business ontology, which is the idea that everything should take on the logic of capitalism. We should run everything like a business. And I mean, that's a different way of describing the same thing I'm talking about. It's a critique of neoliberalism transactionalizing everything. And if we are in a situation where neoliberalism has transactionalized everything, which I assert, and I'm not the only person to ever assert that, and I'm certainly not the most accredited person to ever assert that, we have a situation that I think we should be criticizing. And if we're not, what are we doing? Like, we're not going to get anywhere because it's this layer, a wall that's in front of us, like to get to the next level, which is the more hard capital assumptions, which
exactly.
Like I talk about to bring it to another analogy, elections are easy mode organizing, and you don't see anybody even like they're like, don't participate in elections. It's bad. It's a bad thing. And it's like, well, is it really going to save us? No, but like it is a means to talk to people you'd never talk to. And it's also a means to, get acquainted with organizing that a lot of people are just not doing. They're sitting on Twitter all day, and that's like praxis. Did you see that video? I can't remember who it was, but it was so funny. It was like rich white girls who just found leftism, and she was like, sucking dick is praxis.
Oh my God!
I was just like, oh my God.
You need to.
I was just laughing so hard at it. It's just like, yes, that's part of the problem.
You need to send that to me. I need to see that. That sounds funny.
I will find it. It's so fucking funny. It's the person I believe is a comedian, and it was so fucking funny.
Oh my God. Yes. Oh my God. Yeah, totally. So I guess we'll move on to the next question, which is what motivated you to write Cray? What was the primary sort of fuel?
Well, I would even go I would go back and I'd say that's part of the story of why I'm a leftist, which you basically start from, I saw in 2007 the Michael Moore movie Sicko, which is a documentary on the U.S. healthcare system. That basically is what got me into liberalism. Before that, I would call myself fairly apolitical, not really giving a shit. at that point, I was like, yeah, it is kind of bullshit that we don't have a healthcare system that takes care of people. It's just primarily motivated with greed. So I voted for Barack Obama in the 2008 election because there was a video of him leaked saying that he wanted a single payer system. And I was like, yeah, of course, that's what I want. So in 2010, when a supermajority happened, when the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, there was no, like, they passed a healthcare thing, but it didn't have public healthcare in it at all. And they said it was going to. So that kind of had me disillusioned with the party. And that sort of sets the, in my opinion, stage for what happened to me in my personal life next, which was when I got catfished and the internet decided that it was just me making up a girlfriend and pretending to be super cool, which is a really, like, I don't know why that's why somebody would make up a girlfriend, but whatever. So I saw firsthand a lot of lies about man that I thought were basically silly. Like, I don't know why people would care if somebody made up a girlfriend. I've addressed a lot of things that I did that I think were legitimately shitty during this time period, from jokes that were racially insensitive, for instance. And people didn't care about those things. They cared about the fact that I made up a girlfriend. And I didn't. So, I mean, there's like one big problem there. But the thing that really got me thinking was how this media narrative got accepted. And that's ultimately like the full, like, how I became a leftist, how I started coming up with the concepts that I did this book. Like, it's all about why reality is like it is. And ultimately, that's what got me to leftism. It's the media, it's the state, and it's capital. These things create reality for us. And it's, at this point, a system that has been diffused among us in such a way where we're actually performing the labor of creating reality for these people, directed under what they want, basically. And in my opinion, that's, I mean, there's no better way to say, like, how did you come up with this book? Well, I had the media fuck me over really hard. And I wanted to find out why, how, and try to explain it to people. And yeah, I did that, I guess. Or think I did.
I think you did. I think you did. The next question is, how do you think the book has been received so far? It's been out for quite a while. So what would you say the general reception of it has been?
I don't know how to put it, but it seems to be a lot more positively received than me as a person. Like, for whatever reason, people buy it on Amazon. It's well reviewed on Amazon. I had several outlets try to write reviews of it, but like like The Economist they were going to publish an excerpt from it and do that, but the editor ultimately was like, I don't know how this fits in The Economist. The Economist, for one. But
no surprise at all. No surprise.
Yeah, whoever the fuck was like, I'm going to try to get an article written about this leftist book that starts with, "This is a criticism of capitalism. I'm going to get this into The Economist." That guy, I promise, probably doesn't still work at The Economist. But he talked back and forth. He talked back and forth about it with me to get my input on a couple of things and figure out, like, what would be a good excerpt and what I really want to talk about. And then it never materialized. But like, I also never really expected it to be like received in the media, because it's kind of openly hostile towards the media. And there's no real reason to expect that something like that is going to really be received, so to speak. I just, it seems to me like it's automatically like excluding itself from that realm in a lot of ways. And to some respect, I'm some doofus from Michigan who wrote a book and published it on Amazon. I don't like from the perspective of somebody who knows what they're doing or has a real job, that means nothing. It means absolutely nothing to them. So from that perspective, as well as from the perspective that it's in my opinion, pretty openly hostile towards the media. It's basically been ignored. Like I said, there's been a few times where somebody's tried to say something about it, and it's just basically like, no, why are you doing this?
That's no.
But like as far as people go, I get people who message me fairly. I get emails to my business address, which I just basically ignore all the time, except for when people send me real things. Like I get the Dollar Shave Club stuff all the time. They try to get me to do ads. It's like, no, that's fine. But I get people who message me a fair amount saying like, I didn't really understand that there was something here beyond like a moral opposition to X thing, like whether that X thing be sexism or racism or whatever. A lot of people come to like leftist thought through feminism, and nothing wrong with feminism. I think feminism is great. I'm pro-feminism. But the way that feminism has sort of been recuperated in the media often leads people away from any kind of systemic critique and more towards a moral, like it's basically you're a moral failure if you're a misogynist. And that's just, in my opinion, not how things are. Like everything is sort of arranged in a manner that encourages people to not do that, I guess. Like you find people who like will be labeled a misogynist because they said something that was maybe not approved or was partisan in some way. And I think that has ultimately led us to a place where we're arguing about non-systemic reasons for things like sexism and racism. And ultimately that's what the subject of a lot of these messages of, like, there is something beyond this. Like there's an actual rational justification for this, or there's an actual power structure here. And I didn't consider that. And, you know, I'm not saying that I've made like tons of leftists or anything. I don't know about that, but I am saying that I've gotten a lot of people message me and say, this book opened my eyes in ways that I don't know somebody just telling me something is bad would have. And that makes me happy. So from that perspective, I think it's been well received. It still sells over 100 copies a month, which is just blows my mind. It must have been caught by like Amazon's algorithm as like related to something, because there's no good reason for it to be selling like that still.
Wow, that's amazing. I definitely caught it at quite a formative period myself. It definitely gave me the tools to kind of do systemic analysis in a way that I found difficult to articulate just kind of naturally. And I kind of took that toolkit and ran with it. So in a sense, my channel and the stuff I do is kind of like a child of your channel. So you're like a child of like the board, and then I'm like a child.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. That's really cool to hear, because I really like your channel. It's very like when I started promoting your channel, it was like, this is great. This is like, you were talking about data and shit. It's like nobody is talking. Like there's been like maybe 2 or 3 videos on data in relation to leftism. And it's like, that's the stuff we should be talking about, because it explains things beyond the simple what's morally right, what's morally wrong, in a manner that isn't boring. You can relate an art piece back to a system easily. It's also just far more likely to bring people in my opinion anyway.
Exactly, for sure. I guess part of the reason you like my channel was like your weird like narcissism, because it like it like mirrored you, so you're like, oh my god, this is like a small version of me, this is great.
Yes, exactly. It's because I'm a raging narcissist, and and all I really want is for everybody to repeat everything I say verbatim. That's all.
Oh my god, let's not give them fodder, Peter. Let's not give
I know. Yeah. I hope that came off as sarcastic.
Oh dear. So the next question that I have for you is, what point would you hope that people would take away from the book, if you could choose like one succinct thing that you would hope people would really resonate with?
the attention is currency in the marketplace of ideas thing, because I think some of them are a little bit harder to summarize to other people, but I think I mean, you've seen ContraPoints repeat similar actual things in larger media pieces. It's a relevant thing. Like, people need to say that. You need to understand that this is okay. So we as leftists have to understand the system we're interacting with if we want more leftists to exist. And if we don't understand it, if we don't understand the norms of it, then we might as well be speaking another language to people. And that's the problem. That, in my opinion, for both leftists and for non-leftists, just understanding that this sort of attention market is a pure expression of neoliberal capitalism, and it's what drives what people are talking about. It really works like a market. It's dictated in the same way a market is. Supply demand is not the thing that gets it going, but attention is certainly the currency. If people know how to manipulate that, just like they know how to manipulate money in the stock market, as we know from the 2008 stock market crash that actually made some people very, very rich. I mean, you have at least a start, in my opinion, from there as to what's wrong with capitalism, because capitalism is so intrinsically tied to a specific version of markets.
For sure, for sure. I think this kind of analysis is like desperately needed. So I think there should be like more children. Hopefully, maybe one day in the future, I'll spawn my own weird leftist children as well. Take over the whole mode. It will be great. It will be great. So we'll move on to the next topic now, which is scandal.
Oh yeah, something I'm very familiar with.
Yeah, me too, to be honest. So yeah, I guess we're gonna get spicy now. This is gonna be the spicy part of the video. Well, I specifically wanted to talk to you about the role that scandal has played in your trajectory as a creator. So I guess we could just start with talking about the whole fake girlfriend fiasco and the video that you made, which I definitely think is one of your strongest videos to date. And the way you kind of talked about some of the ideas within custom reality and how, you know, the attention economy around scandal has kind of developed your trajectory so far. Would you like to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, well, for me, scandal has kind of been the thing that has acquainted me with the public. And that's, in my opinion, a very unfortunate thing, because people get to know me through these points where I'm like, fuck you, that's not what I was fucking saying, you fucking shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
So they come in and I'm already yelling.
Yeah. I know.
You're just like, nope, I'll see you. I'm going back this way. But yeah, I get that kind of thing probably more than anything else. People are introduced to me through various scandals. The biggest one, of course, being the fake girlfriend thing, which was ultimately like one of the worst times of my life that has basically been brought up every single day since, which is awesome. It wasn't a time that I would say, mentally healthy during. Like, for me, when people were telling me to kill myself thousands of times a day, and they were, I mean, that it defined how I interact with the world. And a lot of people are like, well, sometimes you're very volatile towards the public. And it's like, what the fuck do you think? Like, I was introduced to the public through people like telling me to kill myself like thousands of times a day. And like, that fucks with a person. It's that simple. And as much as I've really tried very hard to rein it in recent years, particularly this year, because I've really been trying to focus on like, how are we going to shift this mode away from this bullshit individualist crap. But I have to understand, and other people have to understand coming to me, that that's basically like how I grew up on the internet. Even though I was an adult by the time that happened, it's still, I mean, it sucks. And at the same time, you know, I'm struggling to kind of keep it up, and because I've started to talk about people telling me to kill myself at a massive rate.
It's all
But
good. It's all good. I can relate. So yeah.
But I don't know. It's the video itself was kind of this really difficult, long. I'd spent 2 months on that one instead of one, because I had to go back through like so much material that had been written about me to be like, okay, well, what's really the important things to talk about? And it's like all just like vicious as fuck. Like this guy is X, Y, and Z, where X, Y, and Z are just the worst things you can possibly think of. And it's thousands of pages of that all over the internet. And it's like, what the fuck is this? You know, like I really had, I don't think people understand. A lot of people who watched this or have watched the video, I think understated exactly how intense it actually was. And I think that it makes the case that it was pretty intense, but I understated it because I didn't want to make an argument that like the whole thing was about my emotional state. I really don't think the whole thing was about my emotional state. I think it's very much related to how the media is and how capital is and power structures. And I think that those things are just deeply embedded in my experience in sort of where I came from and how I became a quote unquote media figure in any way, even though it was social media. It's still like I've been talked about in the traditional media before in a particularly shitty way multiple times. But I don't know. I guess just the ultimate point here is it really, I think it comes back to all of the systemic critique, no matter what you're talking about. And I think that my experience that led me to make that video and sort of do everything I've done more or less, it always, there's no time that it doesn't come back to systemic analysis. There's no time it doesn't come back to the power structure, to the hierarchy, and all of these things. Because if we want to pretend that it was just my moral failing and it was meritocracy and all of these things, like, well, for one, what was said would have had to have been true. And it wasn't. So like, what the fuck? What the fuck is wrong with this world? And that's how I got to here, basically.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I find very sort of refreshing about your online persona is the fact that you are kind of just figuring things out in real time, and you don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to be super refined. And I think that kind of gives other people permission to also just be human on these platforms.
I wish that more people could understand how much better it is to just live not as a performer.
Yeah.
And like, yes, my videos are ultimately performance pieces, but like just to sort of reject the performance elements of life, for me, it's emotionally just it's put me in a much better place.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I hardly ever tweet, mainly because I'm afraid of the mode. I also had my own brush with scandal at the beginning of the year. And with, you know, that kind of intense vitriol that most people are lucky enough to not have to ever experience in their life. And it definitely does have an effect on the way that one chooses to engage with the public. And I also received criticism for, you know, coming off as abrasive or combative with the public. But I guess it's because I align with that same ethos of not wanting to perform all the time. I basically just am who I am in whatever moment that you catch me. Sometimes I'm happy, sometimes I'm not so happy. It's kind of like, that's how I tend to present myself. And I think that people like you give others like us permission to just be ourselves. You know, there's a lot of other people who have a lot more power in terms of shaping the mode. And they tend to be very overly concerned with optics. And that puts a lot of pressure on the rest of us to behave in that way. And they also capitulate when they don't need to, which is something that I find very frustrating because the onus is then put on us to capitulate too. Like something as silly as a bad take, which really isn't even a bad take. You have certain members of our community who will like apologize profusely or refuse to associate with certain people because there's like a tiny bit of a stain on their name or something like that, like very sort of concerned with optics. And that then puts the onus. So when I had my brush with scandal, I was very new to the community. I had only been making videos for maybe about 4 or 5 months at the time. And all of the onus that was created by the mode that already exists was then thrust upon me to perform and to behave in a certain way, to kind of like, you know, adhere to certain principles or adhere to certain ways of being when put under this sort of pressure. And that really, really rubbed me the wrong way. It didn't sit well with me at all. Uh-oh. We've lost Peter. Hang on a second, guys. I am not sure where Peter's gone. I'm just going to ad-lib until he comes back. Okay, now he's back. Sorry, they.
Yeah, sorry. My internet is blinking.
It's all good. It's all good.
You can see my lights are blinking because they're all connected to the internet. So I don't really know. I have cheap RGB color bulbs, which I never use for anything. And they are now, I think they're mostly stopping. So that's good. I think I've got the internet back. Sorry about that.
You're back. I panicked then for a moment. What part did I stop at? What did you miss?
I sort of panicked and forgot. So.
Okay. I was just talking about how like the onus that other more prominent creators created has like been now thrust upon those of us who are like now sort of coming up, and how when my scandal situation happened, there were all these mores and expectations to capitulate that had been
and you were talking also about how some people they'll go the extra mile in apologizing for something that's so obviously a bad take for the sake of optics. And to some extent, I think I get that. I understand that, but like it's ceding ground in a way that, like, can you be ideologically consistent and continually do this? Like, if we're saying we shouldn't be prioritizing individuals and we should be prioritizing a systemic critique, then why are we capitulating every single time any of this shit comes up? And don't get me wrong, I think that like when somebody does say something that's shitty, like it doesn't hurt to apologize. But ultimately, like if we're like, hold on, everybody hit the brakes, we got to stop because this person said a certain thing in a certain way, and I don't like that, and they need to apologize for it before we can do anything else. I think that's fucked up, honestly.
Yeah. I honestly, because that I'm mostly speaking about cases where it's obviously nothing to write home about, and I've seen a lot of that where somebody has said something vaguely kind of innocuous shit that shouldn't really get anybody's, you know, blood boiling. But then there's still that sort of onus to capitulate for optics reasons. And I think in those cases, the types of people that I tend to resonate with the most are the ones who are brave enough to say fuck off, especially the ones who have power, because it then sets the precedent for those of us who are coming up behind to be able to do the same. I think
whenever I say fuck off, it's usually a bad thing. Like everybody, that's the impetus for when everybody comes after me. But I understand that because it also, like what you're saying, it sort of, you know, says, hey, we don't necessarily always have to capitulate to this. The reason why people go after that specifically, sometimes it can be associated with something that's morally good or morally bad. But ultimately, when you're saying that, it is saying, hey, maybe if we are concentrating on this, it's not necessarily great, and we should actually start concentrating on the bigger picture. And that really bothers people who have sort of embedded themselves into a position in a sort of hierarchy that's created itself out of the orderlessness that we have. This space is not like, it's not organized. The leftist YouTube space is not organized. We don't answer to each other. We don't talk to each other enough. And in that orderlessness, the chaos, we like to think that it produces chaos, but what it actually produces is capitalism moving in and reproducing itself and reasserting its type of hierarchies in our space, and that's exactly what's happened. It's unfortunate, but I think it's what's happened, and we need to start doing some more asserting that this is not what we are. This is not how we work. Like, yes, it's definitely morally wrong to do X, Y, and Z. Sure, yeah. Like, there's things that are genuinely bad, and I don't want anything to do with people who do certain things. But I don't really think that, you know, what we need to be doing is finding people who have said the wrong thing and punishing them, or even like in the case of people who have done bad things but do actually try to show attrition for it, or are trying to reconnect with the community, being like, yeah, I understand what my role in that was, and it maybe wasn't right. Like, those people, as much as it sucks ass, it's not easy for us to forgive. It's not, I understand it's very hard to forgive certain things. And I'm not saying that we automatically have to with every single person. But at the same time, if we continually focus on this mode, if we're always, you know, trying to figure out which individuals are good and which individuals are bad, and the kind of essentialism that comes along with that, which ultimately sort of categorizes, like, the viewpoint that breeds is kind of a, you're born good or you're born bad, and you're always going to be that. You always have been that. It's just been waiting to come out, and I think that's bullshit. I hate that, and I think that we need to stop with it, because everybody can change at any moment. But we are unfortunately under the influence of lots of material conditions. And those are the things that, in my opinion, we should be criticizing. We should be trying to stop the effect that these systems and power structures and hierarchies are imposing on. Like, I'm not saying that you're not responsible if you do something horrible in any way, but I am saying that, like, there's a history that led up to that. And to pretend that it has nothing to do with that, it's wrong. To just essentialize a person as good or bad, it's wrong. And ultimately, we need to stop. We need to find some way to get people to stop, rather, not just like, we need to be better, because we can't just be better. The material conditions created this situation that we're describing as well. So, definitely. I mean, it's an ongoing process.
Definitely. So the next part of the question that I wanted to move on to was how scandal intersects with the attention economy. I'd like to, that's a big one, but I'd like to hear your take on that and how that sort of functions in the type of culture that it produces.
I would say, first off, a lot of my content lately, and if you even pay attention to Adversaries, the series I do with Ashley, my wife, we have gone after that aspect probably just for years. Like, we've noted it in advertising, because advertising has effectively figured out how to use that mode. It has effectively found a way to make okay, so we all pay attention to the bad thing happening. They say you can't look away from a car wreck. I've heard that said so many times throughout my life, and it's to some extent true, but it's also the result. Like, what we pay attention to is also the result of again, material conditions. And we're encouraged to pay attention to these things, because that makes this advertising mode work. It's not just an advertising mode. Marketing is by all means simply just propaganda. And in every aspect of our news, of our entertainment, of our fiction or nonfiction, or just whatever, name a thing. And the reason why I think came to the idea of the attention economy, and sort of noting that the marketplace of ideas, yes, actually does function like a market, and no, markets don't function like everybody thinks they do, The reason I got there is basically scandal. Like, people pay attention to scandal. That's where the attention is. And the People's Bayonet is saying, or to say capital qua non-capital. That's a funny way of putting it. That's an Ayn Rand way of putting it, which is the whole qua thing. I just sorry, I'm getting distracted here, but I love the whole man qua man Ayn Rand crap. It's so easy to get me into a long discussion on how silly Ayn Rand is. And I've intentionally avoided that topic in my own content. Like, whenever I talk about Ayn Rand, if she gets into one of my videos about another topic, it suddenly takes a hard left towards being about Ayn Rand entirely. Because I think she's hilarious. I think she's one of the funniest people to have ever lived, ever.
Oh my God.
But unfortunately, everybody took her seriously. And there's another person who's alive right now who has been exactly like that, that also defines scandal, to bring it back to the real topic. Trump is that. He's the perfect thing if we're talking about funny people that people take seriously, and they gain power from it. It's Trump, and it's Ayn Rand, and it's probably Ronald Reagan as well. But I mean, the attention economy is more or less what gives these people power. They get this kind of if attention is currency in the marketplace of ideas, you get rich if you understand how to manipulate that currency. And if you start from a place of having some of that currency, you can do that without really knowing what you're doing. So you have two types of attention-rich people. You have people who understand how to manipulate, and you have people who started with attention in the first place. And then every once in a while, you have people that intersect. And Donald Trump is one of those people. He has had attention for years, and he understands how to manipulate attention. So, I mean, I put it in the same way that, like, any other market works. A market actor with power understands, or not understands, but can manipulate the market how they want it to. Not necessarily fully how they want it to, but to some extent. And he has just shown the perfect, like I said this in a thread on Twitter, like, we should understand that Trump is basically the perfect representation of capitalism as it is today, because it is a person who understands the media landscape, who is kind of has a cursory understanding of some cultural things, is a racist, is a sexist, is like, he is a perfect mirror image of capitalism as it is today. It's explicitly neoliberal. It's explicitly market oriented in multiple manners, the social, the economic, etc. And to me, if you don't have scandal as an element in that, if you don't understand that scandal is so conducive to creating that person, then you can't critique the system at all. Like, the system is so built on that. Like, in order to distract us from like the exploitation happening in, let's say, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Donald Trump, if suddenly, like, the media shifted to talking about that, not that they would, but Donald Trump could easily change it by literally pointing at any random congressperson and saying, they're a insert, dog whistle. And that's it. We stop talking about the important thing and start talking about the fact that the head guy is racist, which, in itself is a distraction, because it distracts us from talking about systemic racism, which is, I mean, it's amazing. Scandal is perfect for our economy as it is today, because it allows narratives to play out that have nothing to do at all with anything that's going on in anyone's real life.
How do you think that it functions in our space, in our kind of like weird little leftist space? How do you think the attention economy functions, both positively and negatively, speaking of like the cynical ways that it's often used as well?
Well, if we're going to talk explicitly about YouTube, anybody who's uploaded to YouTube knows exactly how much anybody is watching their videos at any given time. And so you and I can look in analytics at any time and be like, okay, well, people are watching 67% of my video, an average watch time of 12 minutes and 36 seconds. And that is an explicit metric reading of the attention economy.
Mm.
I mean, to have any kind of explicit reading is odd. It's strange that we're actually able to do that. Like most of the time, in like a quote unquote real physical market, we can read it with who is making money, but we don't actually. Attention is a sort of abstract currency or a metaphorical currency in some respects. So, to you and I, we actually are among people who have an explicit way of understanding how much of that currency we have. And I think that that's very different from a lot of places. Like, yes, there are analytics on Twitter, and yes, you can kind of read like, okay, I got a bunch of likes, or a lot of people are retweeting this, so I have some degree of attention.
Mm.
It's not the same because like we have an explicit, like, these are the amount of seconds that people are paying attention to us.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the algorithms do function on these same kinds of metrics. So you have Twitter that's obviously promoting tweets that people are engaging with more. You have YouTube promoting videos that are being watched more. And, given we have, real time even analytics, like you can see how many people have watched a video in the last minute. For example, with my last video, I was like, people aren't watching this, and people should be. Like, this is a video that has Scarlett Johansson in the title. I don't understand why people aren't watching it. So I adjusted the thumbnail and the title for an hour until it was on an upward thing. Like, and that's something that a lot of people do. That's maybe in leftist spaces, not something people are doing as much because we sort of pick thumbnails and stick with them. I generally do as well. But I was like, this is definitely not doing what it should be doing.
Mm.
So I guess if you look outside of the leftist space on YouTube, you have people who will A/B test thumbnails, and they'll change titles just like for the first hour of the videos. I'll just constant change just to see like any tiny little advantage they can have. I watched a video on the algorithm where the gentleman describes exactly that. Just sort of this endless sort of what is happening, how is this getting attention in the current situation as is. And the leftist space, I don't think is, like I said, doing that as much. But I mean, if somebody realized, hey, I could be testing everything for the first hour and maximizing how it works, I mean, somebody could in theory have an unfair advantage. Sure, but I think what you see in the leftist space more so is people picking topics based on that.
Mm.
And I think we have a lot of our media criticism that comes from that. It's kind of like we know this thing has attention. This is how I often I'll often just literally sort of cruise the news, like what's getting attention and how can I relate it back to a systemic critique. Like that's Many Peters is usually born from that explicitly. Okay, they're talking about this. How could I get that back to capitalism?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, like, I don't know if in some respects, I wonder if we have enough people who are sort of actually paying attention to the pop culture and how we could in theory redirect that to a systemic critique. But at the same time, I sometimes I think that there's a conflict going on within the sort of consumer area of LeftTube where people are not happy with the fact that people will talk about pop culture and actually worry about the attention economy, where it's like, I don't know, it's an argument that people are having a lot right now between old BreadTube and new BreadTube. And I think that it's not a good argument because it sort of ignores what I think is a critique that could ultimately, if actually acted on, like if we actually cared about the attention economy and cared about how we can put our arguments in a place where they'll actually get sucked up into the algorithm and distributed to people, how we could actually be getting the systemic message to more people. Like, you start from Scarlett Johansson and you end in capitalism. Capitalism is the most broad possible thing. I don't know. I'm not saying that people need to copy my channel or anything. But I am saying that, like, hey, there's things that go on in pop culture that get attention that you can easily relate back to a systemic critique. If you have a functioning systemic critique, why not at least try? So I wonder, to some respect, like, could we be indulging the attention economy a little bit more? And then I wonder, like, is that morally good? Like, is that morally something that I'm interested in? And it isn't all the time. Sometimes I make videos that are very much not something that I think will get attention. But at the same time, I think, like, we need, if we're thinking strategically, we need to understand that we're interfacing with a system we ultimately don't like, and that's the reality. Like, we have to understand I mean, we should try to get the attention economy. We shouldn't just be like, well, fuck that shit. Peter Coffin's talking about it, so he's talking about. I had somebody be like, listen, you're talking about Scarlett Johansson when you should be talking about, and they named something going on in South America right now. And it's like, I understand that that's important, and I believe that that's important, but the people I will be talking to, if I talk about that subject, are people that know about that subject already. And people don't understand. Also, I'm not their employee, so they can't really tell me what to do. Yeah. But I'm not fond of it from that angle either. But, like, I'm really not fond of it from the perspective of, you have to understand, like, it's in some ways a game. Like, what can you figure out how to inject into a thing that people will actually click?
I guess in that sense, I feel somewhat alienated from the attention economy. And my channel's still doing fairly well. I've only just learned how to do metadata. Like, I wasn't doing that before. I got this thing called, like, vidIQ. And, like, I'm still
I've got two, buddy. It's the same thing, basically.
I'm still, like, kind of learning about how it works. Like, I like, everything that I've gotten, I like most of my video, like, pretty much all of them are above 10K views at this point. But I don't do anything. My thumbnails are shit. Some of them don't have any metadata at all on them. A lot of the things that I talk about are, like, weird and fringe. They're not things that people would be particularly looking for. But
I would almost say that, like, that's partly an advantage for you, because in leftist spaces, there's no one talking about a lot of this stuff that you've talked about. So it kind of, just as far as leftists go, like, it sucks the people in. And to some respect, it even does it with non-leftists, because you've brought, like, for instance, in the one where you talked about spirituality, you used the lens of Twin Peaks, which is, again, kind of a niche show, but it has quite an audience of people who aren't leftists. And I'm sure that you saw at least some of those people show up in that video.
I did. Some of them were like, oh, thank you for the cool analysis. And some of them were like, oh, I came here expecting, like, fucking Twin Peaks analysis. Like, you tricked me, you fucking bitch. So,
really?
Yeah,
that's, like, unnecessarily hostile.
I know there were some people who were, like, mad about it, but they were few and far between, luckily. But yeah, I feel somewhat alienated from the attention economy. I guess that I have my own little, like, weird space. But at the same time, like, that kind of shit just scares me. And I think there's, like, a place for it, and I think that there are people who are better at manipulating it than others.
For sure. And
I find it difficult to engage in that mode without coming across as, like, cynical. And that's not to say that anybody who does comes across as cynical. But there are people, even within our community, you know, people who I'm friends with who, you know, try really hard to, like, push that mode in order to accumulate that sort of attention. But that sort of attention can sometimes be quite hollow, because people are there to engage with the flashy, shiny thing.
Yeah.
And after that, they don't give a shit. Whereas, like, my process is kind of like a slow, steady thing where I'm more interested in attracting people that are going to be in for the long haul.
Yes.
Like there are a lot of people who have a lot more attention than me in terms of like subscribers and in terms of some on certain videos view count. But then when you like look at their Patreon or other places, I have more Patreons than them, or you know, because I'm more concerned about cultivating those kind of long-term kind of like, I guess, more holistic relationships with the people who kind of view my content, rather than it just being like, let me grab the attention by talking about this really hot topic. The one time the one time I did that was with the Jordan Peterson video, but even then it was kind of like a thing I regretted, because yeah, my subscriber count jumped a little bit, but a lot of those people didn't stick around.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why I don't know. There are areas where it's good, because then you do want to reach the public consciousness. You do want to inject ideas into the mainstream as much as possible. But just speaking as it from like a personal perspective in terms of the type of space that I want to create, it kind of makes me shy away a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is when you have somebody that's exclusively focused on the attention economy, and it isn't leftism, basically. Like it's at most liberalism to like present some type of, because ultimately this is why you ultimately have to find a balance, I think, because like I say, I try to start from something that, for many Peters anyway, I start from something that is getting attention and just work back to capitalism.
Capitalism, exactly.
And I think that some people don't necessarily think that way. And like, it's not really a balance for everyone. And in some cases, I mean, I can't off the top of my head really name one way or the other, but like, I mean, I think everybody is kind of doing some version of that, but maybe not consciously.
Yeah.
And maybe it needs to be more of a conscious engagement with this type of a thing, where we're engaging with it from a critical perspective, where you know, I think it is important to interface with the system, understanding that it is a hostile system, and it's something that we can't just get rid of as content creators. Ultimately, we're not going to make a video that ends capitalism. It's silly to believe that. We have to understand that what we're doing it's ultimately a labor of trying to get us closer to that, in, you know, in a place where people are generally not really thinking about, like, capitalist realism, to bring up again, shows us exactly how like little is presented that could be that could subvert what the world, like, the subtitle for capitalist realism is there no alternative? And the fact is that a lot of people look at the world as if there isn't, and we're ultimately there to present hopefully that there is an alternative, maybe some broad strokes of what that alternative might be, and just try to open people's minds. Because if we think of ourselves as like the center of the revolution, then we're ultimately going to fail ourselves and fail the people who follow us, because there's no way that content is ever going to do it. But content is an important step. It's a pamphlet. Like, if there wasn't people handing out pamphlets, would there have been a revolution in Catalonia? Would there have been, like, you have to talk to people and find people and find each other, for that matter. Just like, people have to understand that the solution isn't going to come from me, a content creator, or from you, a content creator, or from even a specific philosopher. The solution is in each other and in our cooperative and collective work as a movement. And we aren't there. Hopefully content can play a role in making that movement. But as like what we've been talking about with the attention economy, we have to think from the perspective of people are going to watch things that more or less they think are going to confirm whatever bias they currently have. And if we understand that, I think we can create content that sort of subverts their expectations and maybe makes them think about things differently, or even in some cases, just like cultivate. Like it's about cultivating sort of an anti-cult, so to speak, like just deprogramming people in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And that's like, if we are thinking about it from like just strictly an attention economy perspective and not from a like we start here and we move to this point, attempt to bring in actual analysis, we're not going to succeed in on that front even.
For sure, for sure. This actually segues into the next topic, which is about LeftTube. You've been on the platform for a creator as a creator for a while. I'm fairly new, just a year old now. It's weird to say that. It sounds like
that's very cool though. Like to be like I think I've followed you for most of that year, so
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
pretty stoked about that.
Yeah, it was like my second or third video where you were like, "Oh, this person's doing some cool shit." So yeah, basically it's been a year, which is Angie Speaks' birthday was last month. So yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, I basically wanted to ask you about how you think the mode has shifted or is in the process of shifting. I know there was that like meme that was going around a couple of days ago where everyone was like clutching their pearls.
Oh yeah.
Like
old. I brought it up a second ago. The old bread tube versus new bread tube, which I think is I want to point out one of the funniest contradictions in this image. Like, it is so clearly a meme that was made by Marxist-Leninists, and they're claiming old bread tube, which bread is a reference to the bread book, which is Kropotkin, which is anarchism. Which I think that automatically, like when you start from there, it's just like, okay, so what are they trying to do with this? Like, ultimately, like I think what we find here, like there's some legitimate criticism, I think, in this meme. Not necessarily, like there's some of it that can come off fairly bigoted too, but there is like a sort of focus on personalities over theory that I think it's not wrong. And the reaction it created in some folks showed that people are a bit afraid of the idea that this could get attention and be regarded as an actual criticism. Now, that being said, again, some of it can come off a bit bigoted because it was very much like pointing at gay as kind of like, this is a difference between old bread too. Like, there's a lot of gay people that are hard communists. Like, let's just start from that point. But I mean, I don't know. I think that it kind of shows the two different consumer demographics that want something out of bread tube or leftist YouTube or whatever.
I thought it was funny because both of the dichotomies that it tried to create don't really exist.
No,
there is
absolutely not. They're both pretend. I mean, they do have elements of truth in them, but they're both pretend. They're both like fetishizations of one element of leftism. And I think that it was really strange to see like people just outright like, nope, there's nothing here. Like, well, there's some elements of I mean, this is exactly how conservatives sort of do things. Conservatives will find an argument that liberals maybe actually do something that is hypocritical or irritating or whatever, and they'll provide a scapegoat argument for it. We kind of saw that in this meme. It's not necessarily conservative. I mean, it is kind of conservative because it's like the good old days of BreadTube, which never existed. But I mean, it shows the two competing consumer demographics, which comes back to the sort of real fan dichotomy and the fetishization of competition between demographics. It's ultimately more market shit. Like it's literally like our demographic is better than your demographic. We watched videos before you did. We're the real fans, and it should be catering to us. And it's like, do you realize how familiar that sounds to everything?
Well, I mean, there's an element of truth in both. It's
exactly
both are absurd, but there's like an element of truth in that. Like, the fucking annoying like Dick Measury kind of like hardline Marxist-Leninist folks like piss me off. I will still organize with them. I have friends that are fucking hardline Marxist-Leninist.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I don't have a problem with people who hate capitalism for the most part. You can come to the party. I'm not like a exclusive person in that regard. But
Same.
then there's also like the Yas Queen crowd.
Oh yes.
And they try to come for me all the time. And
yeah, they tend to be the people that hate me the most, and I'm sitting here like borderline defending them, and it's irritating to me because it's like, you folks, you need to understand, I'm not here to attack you. I am here to bring a systemic critique. I mean, in some ways, like I very much identify with the want for the theory to come in, because like multiple times during this interview, I've been like, the problem with this is it's not brought back to a systemic critique. And I mean, theory is the easiest way to come back to a systemic critique because it's established systemic critique.
Yeah, but then that's the thing, is it's the focus on sort of this sort of individual celebrity worship type of thing, which is what I mean when I say the Yas Queen people. And you know, people try to do that shit with me all the time because I'm like a woman of color, and they want to like elevate me because then it makes them like look good, or it makes it, I don't know, absolves them of their like fucking white guilt. I don't know, but I find it so cynical. And there are loads of people that are willing to sort of take advantage of that aspect of the attention economy, the aspect that identity sort of provides you. And I like actively fucking reject that shit because I find it so like abhorrent, and it just seems like an affront to my being. And I do get a lot of hatred, and I get a lot of vitriol because of it. And you know, there is an element of that. There's an element of people wanting to sort of form clusters around certain interest groups or identities, elevate somebody from that interest group or identity, and then have them be the totem of perfect representation that they can all sort of like gather around and admire, and then eventually admonish when they fuck up in some way, cancel, and then replace them with somebody else. And like,
there can be only one.
Yeah, there can only be one, Peter.
I hate that so much. Okay, so somebody in the chat said the Yas Queen crowd is a highly problematic categorization, and I wanted to make I wanted to say something really specific about that. It's when you're talking about the Yas Queen crowd, if like I did that 3 years ago, I'd be talking specifically about Black people, and that would be a problem. But when you're talking about a bunch of white people who have sort of co-opted that language and made a lifestyle sort of that is consumable out of it, and it becomes very popular and everybody is doing it, and it's super annoying because it's essentially a consumer thing at this point. No, it's not a highly problematic categorization. With context, that kind of a categorization can mean something completely different. And that the context of the last 3 years of history, I think, makes a very specific case against like the sort of mass marketization of Yas Queen, so to speak.
You're very you put that in very succinct, very polite terms, because I was just about to like go off on whoever said that. Because that's
well, I know what happens whenever I just do the other thing, which is like, fuck off, enough. But like the thing is like there is a genuine I understand that there's a genuine concern under it.
Well, but it's like that's so fucking clearly not what we were on about, which is what pisses me off.
I do agree that like
that's just like a complete cynical reading of what we were on about, which is why I get like very fucking annoyed when shit like that happens, because we're talking about a very specific group of white people who have appropriated this language in order to make the system kind of reproduce itself. I don't think that there's anything problematic in using that terminology to describe this very specific thing that we're talking about. But anyway,
I mean, we're literally talking about leftism being recuperated, which would then I would think imply that we're talking about the recuperated version of Yas Queen, so to speak.
Exactly. But anyway, back to what I was saying. Yeah, it's kind of the idea of perfect representation. Let us kind of form a cluster around specific identities, or even it doesn't even have to be like a racial or gender or sexual identity. It could also be around the theory that I like.
Well, for one, People sell books. I mean, there's an actual market for theory that's against markets. I mean, this stuff, it does exist. And like, here's the thing. Like, if I was institutionally supported and saying all of the exact same things, I could ultimately like adjust tiny little things that redirect back into consumption. It's not, I understand a lot of the concern that people have when they talk about like, you're using this language wrong or using this language wrong, because it is very possible to benefit the system using this language. But I think what we're sort of talking about in this, the Yas Queen, those types of folks, the mass market Yas Queens, so to speak. Maybe we can we can delineate with saying the mass market Yas Queen crowd.
I refuse to fucking capitulate.
Yeah, I mean, it is an obvious, it should be, I think, fairly obvious what we mean. Like, the context of it, we're not being like, it's bad to use slang.
Yeah, exactly. It's a specific thing that we're trying.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to appropriate that stuff for a following, for a market to sell products, or like you said, you could even do it with theory. If you fetishize theory in a certain way, you can make a little grift for yourself where you're like, this guy out of history is the best, and I'm going to talk about how great they are all the time, and I'm going to repeat things that they say all the time, and I'm going to act like there's no other real true theory, that this particular academic or this particular theorist, like, these cults of personality do happen, and they are a capitalist thing. And it's stuff that I talk about in my book with the cultivated identity stuff and the need for somewhere to belong. It's appropriated, it's used. And this is, I don't think that identity is not a political concern, for instance. I think that it is, but I think that the sort of marketization, the commodification of identity is very apparent in what people call identity politics and criticize as identity politics. And the fact that we aren't really able to criticize that because it's so heavily partisan. If you're either idpol is bad or idpol is good, and that's not, I mean, it's just just not good. It's not good. Because it's not good or bad. It's a category of political concern. It's one of many categories of political concern. And if we could actually consider things in that way, it'd be good. Identity politics, as the liberals would put, is ultimately a form of marketing. And we should be able to delineate the difference between a criticism of marketing using identity. This is actually what I called cultivated identity before I called it cultivated identity. I called it identity marketing. We should be able to delineate these two things. I actually changed it to cultivated identity because A, I really liked the farm metaphor, and B, it caused people to be like, so you're against identity politics? It's like, no, I'm not against identity politics. The thing that we're calling identity politics is a form of marketing, and it's a problem. Identity is a category of political concern that interacts with class, interacts with disability, interacts with various aspects of the world as it is today. And our hierarchies and power structures deal with that stuff accordingly. In some ways, it recuperates it with marketing. In others, it just like vehemently oppresses people. It's just, there's more to it than just, is idpol good or bad? And I wish that, I mean, the whole Yas Queen is a problematic characterization thing is kind of an example of that. We should be able to criticize something with the understanding that we're leftists and we're not trying to like say that a race is not as good as another race.
Exactly. People are saying that we should steal the Yas Queens and give them back to the poor, which I definitely
agree with.
I definitely agree with that. Or there's loads of funny things going on. Seize the means of Yasduction. I like that one. That's
the means of
yes, to each according to his queen. Definitely. I think Marx would be proud. I do think Marx would be proud.
Take it, well, and that's the whole point of some of the stuff I talk about, which is I mean, you've talked about it as well. Just there's a need not to cede ground in the way that we constantly
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
And that's, in my opinion, one of the bigger problems with
yeah,
even the sort of attention economy
yeah,
area of LeftTube
yeah.
is when the attention starts to get a little hot, so to speak.
Mm.
The need to capitulate becomes more apparent, and
Mhm.
yeah.
It's interesting to me though, because one of the questions I have for you on this topic is why do you think that there is the urge to cluster around us individuals and elevate individuals and have those people be kind of symbolic arbiters for whatever it is the group is trying to achieve for itself? You know, it's almost like the bees and like the queen bee, and then they like put the queen bee on the pedestal, and then they, you know, worship the queen bee, kind of like.
Well, I think to some extent it creates a level of accountability,
Mm,
and it makes it so that, like, if we don't get this thing fixed, at least we can blame somebody.
interesting.
I
Interesting.
think that I mean, that's the sort of negative side. And the positive side is, again, we can credit this person if something changes that's good, which is often not correct either, because we shouldn't be crediting any individual for a full societal change. Like, as much as Martin Luther King Jr. was an awesome person and a huge, massive figure, he also had a movement behind him of
Mhm,
everyday people who were as much there as he was.
mhm,
And I mean, I think he even said things to this specific effect that it's not about me.
mhm,
And this is, you know, I would hope that it's basic stuff for anybody who's
mhm,
wanting to actually organize. It's never about, it can't be about a personality.
mhm,
The personality might be, they might be awesome. They might actually accomplish something. That's great. But society wide, no individual will ever be fully responsible for a fully social change, or
exactly.
maybe a systemic one. But
For sure. I was also gonna ask, you know, there's sort of a fracturing happening in the mode, or from what people, there's a
Mhm.
lot of conversation about the fracturing of RedTube, or like, you know, this there's like a weird kind of coming apart that seems to be occurring. I've been blamed for it. You've been blamed for it.
Oh, I've definitely been blamed for it.
Lots of other people have also been blamed for this sort of fracturing that's occurring. What are your ideas around it? I know that mine are to do with, I think it's like there are people who are interested in exposing how capitalism affects our mode and
Mhm.
trying to sort of circumvent that and use it as a way of as a means of subversion. And then there
Mhm.
are those who are kind of just content to operate in things as they are. Uh,
Yeah.
that's kind of how I don't think that that's something that has been specifically caused. I just think it's a contradiction that's making itself apparent now more than ever. What are your thoughts?
I definitely think that that's kind of where the actual rift is. It's sort of along the lines of who really isn't, like, I hate to say it this way because it's going to be taken by some as like who's a pure leftist and who's not, because that's not really my goal. But I think that in some respects, you see this fracture happening along the line of, am I comfortable or am I not?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm, if I somehow got like $1 million tomorrow and was able to buy my house and pay off all of my debt, would I technically be comfortable? Yes, but would I be emotionally comfortable? No. And I don't know if that's the same for everybody. And I think that even if somebody is or isn't comfortable now at this current exact second, the goal of kind of comfort is, in my opinion, kind of where this rift is forming. I'm going to be somebody who is always like, yeah, but we could go a little bit further. And that annoys some people because they're like, okay, well, things are actually finally fucking working for me. Like, I want to continue this is a thing that's working for me. I have a community. I have people who say I'm good. I have this, I have that. And I don't blame people for that, because again, like I talk very much about the need for somewhere to belong in capitalism. Capitalism is more than happy to give you something that seems like that. But ultimately, I also kind of think it's a bit of a sham. and that's, I think it's underlyingly apparent in everything I do. And I think that there's a lot of people who have that same thing. Like if you pay attention to them for long enough, they're ultimately going to be like, well, here's the thing. You can't actually rely on me in this way, and you shouldn't rely on anybody in this way. And there's some people who are like, could you just not say stuff like that? Like, you can rely on me. Like, I want them to rely on me. And well, they may not necessarily actually like send you a message saying, hey, could you not say that? Like suddenly certain people don't talk to you anymore. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of silly at this point. Like you said before at the beginning, like the mode isn't, because I think a lot of the viewers and the audience think that we're all like at some fucking country club and we all like talk to each other and there's like some form of organization, but there really isn't. It's just kind of chaotic. It's just kind of like loosely affiliated people making content. I remember I had an interview with some fucking publication. I don't remember which one it was. But they were doing an article about LeftTube, and they featured a bunch of other creators on there. And the first thing that they asked me was like, "Oh, are you guys friends? Like, do you guys know each other? Like, how much time do you spend interacting with one another?" I was like, "I don't know any of these fucking people. It's just it's not what you think it is. It's a mode. Yes, we have similar, I guess, demographics that we tap into, but there's not a whole lot of organization or communication that goes on behind the scenes among certain groups anyway." And I guess that is kind of part of what contributes to the perceived fracturing that people are going on about. It was always there. It wasn't something that sort of just came up overnight. It was always there. But I guess now that the metrics are more obvious, things have become more apparent to people. I'm still sort of mulling it over in my head in terms of why people are noticing this now more than before, because it was always a thing, as from what
absolutely. I would even say that like when leftist YouTube started becoming popular, there was kind of a problem in that the popular people were like, we don't really know each other. We don't really talk to, like, people really, they ask about like what this person's doing. We don't really talk to each other. It's like, all right, well, here's the problem. And this is something that I was complicit in, I would say, because I didn't really speak up or say anything about this, or maybe even didn't even realize it. But like, and this is probably got to be the last thing we talk about because I got to get going soon. But I think that was the wrong place to start from. Like, yeah, no, we definitely don't know each other because we live on other sides of the world, but we shouldn't really be like, no, don't ask me about that, because no, we should be talking to each other. Like, we should be, again, like I said earlier, finding each other, working with each other, like trying to organize. Like the fact that this space on YouTube isn't organized is specifically why it has sort of just reproduced the capitalist dynamic. We have our big people who are doing fine and they aren't pushing things in the way they were anymore. And we have everybody else who's kind of just, trying to figure out how to get something going. Like, even to some extent, I am in that situation. I mean, I have a lot more attention than a lot of other people do, but I don't have as much as people think I do. And B, when I put out a video, I try to put something out that makes people think about something they didn't think about before. And lately, especially with this sort of like separation, this floating away of everybody just kind of becoming more unconnected and more atomized, I'm like kind of worried in some respects about what I'm putting out, because are people going to watch this? Like, do they want to find out whether Obama's birth certificate was real or not? I don't know, pick some issue that's already been solved and make a 40-minute video essay about it. And maybe that's what people want. Maybe they don't want to hear me talking about how justice in the United States of America is an entertainment commodity and we're fucked because of that. Maybe they don't want to hear about how outrage is being commodified and is used to direct certain modes of communication. Maybe they don't. And it's fucked me. Like this last month, like until this last few days where we've been sort of talking and trying to get stuff back on track. Like I've been like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, really on a constant basis too. Like like you need to have other people in your space that you're working with. Otherwise it's just like, what am I fucking doing? You're questioning yourself at all fucking times. And it's just, yeah.
It's true. I guess for the final question before we wrap up, what are your hopes for the future of the mode?
Well, I would like to see us organized. I really, really would like to see more organization. I'd like to see people focusing less on drama, and I'd like to see less focus on personalities. As much as I would like to see more successful personalities, I'd like to see that be a byproduct rather than the goal. I think that people need to donate to as many smaller leftists as they can when they see somebody on Patreon who's like under 1,000, prioritize them in your Patreon donating, for instance. And you know, if we can get more people into the fold where they're actually comfortable in constantly producing content, it's going to be different than the sort of top-down model we have now, and it really needs to be. We really need to move away from this top-down. We have the big three and everybody else, and it's not. For there was a brief moment where around horseshoe theory, where it was the big four and people were tweeting memes of all four in the political compass and all of that, and I was like, I don't want this. This is not what I want. Like I was included in that. Like I was being like looked at as kind of a meme, as like one of the, and I potentially saw a career path, and I was like, this is not what I want. Like I was really freaked out about it, to be completely honest, and it really hindered my output for a while. And I started, once I finally sorted myself emotionally on that, I started, I think I started getting consistent again. But like I actually had a little bit of like I really don't want to be like, I'm not here to be a celebrity. I'm not here to be, and I'm not saying that those folks are, I'm not saying that their goal is to be a celebrity, but I am saying that's been the ultimate byproduct. Like we have 3 celebrities and then a bunch of leftists.
I definitely see that. I mean, my hopes would be to sort of saturate the mode with as much leftist content.
Yeah, same. Overwhelm
the mode with as much leftist content from as many unique perspectives as possible.
Like I want to see the long video essays that are very arty, and I also want to see people talk for 6 to 10 minutes about a thing that they care about, just to the camera. Whatever.
Yeah. There's plenty of space in the fold, but the way the system kind of reinforces itself is by creating these somewhat hierarchical structures and creating these like giant clusters or monopolies of attention. And nobody really seems to question that / how it could be hindering how the mode is developing, especially since scandal is such a huge fucking thing. If a scandal was to hit one of the big 3, I feel like the entire mode would crumble.
It's possible.
Yeah,
I've considered that as well. It's entirely possible that,
and that undue pressure on them to like perform perfection, and it's also undue pressure on the entire mode itself to like basically. I wouldn't want to be in that kind of like position. That would fucking suck.
Well, that was kind of my whole thing. Like, especially as ContraPoint started getting more articles, like there are people who criticize her for being in the media a lot, and for me it's the exact opposite. As somebody who's had like a very bad experience with the media, I'm just like, oh my god, that is the most fucking terrifying thing to me. Is like a bunch of media attention. And I feel like people don't take that into account enough when they're talking about that, because it can be like just hugely destructive to a person. And I'm not saying it is for her. She may very well be doing great thanks to the media. I don't know. I can't look inside other people's heads. But like, it's not just like, hey, so she's in the media and that means she's bad now. It's also not, hey, she's getting tons of attention and that means she's the best leftist. Like, both of these things seem to not necessarily literally manifest as like speech, things that are people directly saying, but like as attitudes. And my voice is starting to really die.
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely seen those. And again, it's this like really stupid dichotomy that doesn't really make very much sense in reality. The same way that meme kind of tried to dichotomize LeftTube, there's that certain way that people try to dichotomize personalities on LeftTube, which makes absolutely
for sure.
no sense at all. But I just wish that there was more of less of a monopoly around certain personalities. I think that definitely does hinder the mode, especially if something was to happen. I feel like the mode would just crumble underneath all of that, which is really bad because there's all this potential that we have that shouldn't necessarily be thwarted by the weird kind of capitalist mores that we tend to follow without question.
Again, the tyranny of orderlessness created this. Like it basically forces us into that same kind of capitalist hierarchy, and that's both a strength for a few people and a weakness for everybody, because it pins everything on. Like when we talk about representation and the, you know, making a certain minority the minority, it basically it pins the hopes of an entire community on you know, that specific personality, that actor, that musician, that whatever. And if they do something bad, it's looked at as like detrimental to black people if it's a black person, to gay people as if it's a gay person. And that's fucked up. And we're subject to that as much because, again, we have not organized this space, and that's not good. We need to organize this space. And not just organize, not just one, like, let's throw everybody in a Discord. We need to have, like, you know, sort of a means to check in with the larger community. We need to have smaller cells sort of working with each other. It's just stuff that we haven't done for whatever reason.
Yeah, definitely. But there's hope because there's little pieces of it kind of happening here and there. And I think
I see it. Yeah, I see stuff changing.
Yeah. And
I think it's partly because of this conversation that's happened.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, I really need to get going.
It's all good. It's all good. I was just going to say, thank you very much for coming on. I've had such a great time talking to you. And thanks to everybody who came and everyone in the chat. I hope you got a lot out of this interview. Peter, is there anything you want to push or plug before you run away?
Just follow me on stuff and maybe check out my book because we talked about it. I do think that my book doesn't suck. I think it's actually a pretty good book.
That's like the worst sell I've ever seen, Peter.
I'm not good at selling things. Like, I've been a salesperson before too, and like I fucking suck at it so bad.
No problem. So the link to Peter's book is in the description if you want to check it out. I highly recommend it. Thank you guys for coming. Enjoy your dinner, Peter, and I shall see you all later. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.